All right, everybody. So today, back on the podcast, we have Geoffrey Verity Schofield. What's up, man?
Not too much. How's it going?
Well, eventually, we've talked about we're going to have you, me, Abel, Brian Borstein, Aaron Straker, Steve Hall, probably missing a couple people in there. So you'll have to get a flight for that.
Yeah, I'd be down. That would be a hell of a roundtable.
Yeah, right. So we've been talking. I mean, obviously, like we just talk on Instagram here and there. I actually had a nightmare last night that we were trying to do this podcast, and my Instagram got hacked because everybody's Instagram seems to get hacked. Mike Gizzertel, Abel's been kicked off like 8 times now. Brian Borstein was hacked, and I couldn't get on. And not only could I not get on, but somebody was like posting my like random like private photos just like on Instagram, and it was a whole mess. I woke up like, holy crap. I have very relevant dreams of things going on in my life.
Yeah, no, it's scary, man. Like I've thought about even making a backup in advance, but like who's going to subscribe or follow a backup, right?
Yeah.
Like not many people, but considering how common it is and how shitty Instagram is at customer service by like all accounts, yeah, it's something that I should probably consider. Because it can affect your life and your business and everything.
Yeah.
In a big way. And they probably shouldn't have that much power. Like it's actually kind of ridiculous.
It doesn't seem too bad on YouTube. Like every once in a while, like there was the whole natural hypertrophy thing. But other than that, there really aren't too many examples I can think of where somebody was just totally screwed over on YouTube. I mean, maybe the algorithm changes and things like that, but not like losing your account. But on Instagram, when I first started, I got hacked by some Russian account. And then, I mean, I feel like it's almost half the people I know have had some issue there. You know, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's not good. And I mean, Vegan Gains is still posting on YouTube. So
right,
like
exactly
that shows you like you can get away with some pretty rancid stuff and still, keep your account. They'll warn you and they'll ban you, but like you get it back eventually. And even with natural hypertrophy, I think that was a very weird situation, but it still worked out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully. But yeah, with Instagram, it's like just like you don't even know. It's like I think with Mike Israel, like he doesn't even, and maybe with Abel, like they don't even tell you what you did or if you did anything at all. It's just like
you're just gone.
Guidelines or something for.
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. I'm looking up Vegan Gains now. I guess he's still posting stuff. I don't hear people really talking about him anymore, but yeah, it looks like he's still around, still doing stuff. But yeah, it is interesting. So we were talking, speaking of these kind of crazy influencers, quote unquote, we were talking about Liver King. And I mentioned, I don't know if I'm just hearing about him more because like I clicked a video and then now the algorithm is just giving me Liver King stuff, or if he's continuing to blow up. But I guess it's been like a year or so that he's been out there.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't see your video on it, but I know you were talking about how like maybe things have changed since you made your video on him. I don't know if you want to like elaborate on that at all.
Yeah. So I initially wanted it to be like not just a video slamming him or like a natty or not on him, because let's face it, he doesn't really need he doesn't really need one of those. Like it's pretty clear which side of the fence he's on. But so I wanted to do a video just assessing his primal tenets. It's like cold and shield and all this other caveman bullshit. And it wasn't too bad, right? Like a few of them, you ground, you put your feet on the bare earth and this grounds you to the earth or some bullshit. That didn't really have any kind of evidence for it. But, overall, I think if most people added these into their lives, they would probably be better for it. So overall, it was positive, but since then, he's just been like a big bag of shit. I mean, to the point where I've even thought about deleting that video just because it's like mildly positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, my views on him have changed quite a bit. I used to think, oh, he's a little bit rough around the edges, but like, not too bad. Nah, definitely in the big bag of shit category. And it's clear he's just in it for the attention. And then to push the supplements, and he does get people talking about him one way or another, like doing all kinds of weird caveman stuff in New York City and whatnot, firing guns, which is as primal as it gets,
right?
That kind of stuff. Using a tank to blow stuff up. really just, our ancestors could totally relate and jive with the stuff he's doing, as well as, all the liver, which people wouldn't actually have access to that much liver because that doesn't make any sense. What would you need to slaughter 20 cows per village every day to get the liver? That doesn't really add up, just mathematically speaking. So yeah, overall, my verdict is that not good overall.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you get to that point because we have, and obviously it's going to be every variation in between, but we have people who like they're just like brutally honest with just about everything, and it's hard to know if they're truly honest about every single thing. But like I'd say you're very open and like, hey, here's my crappy pictures and here's my really good pictures. Here's when I'm bulking. Here's when I'm cutting, and I'm glad to see that that's out there. And there are a lot of people like that. And then you have probably the norm, which is like they're not blatantly lying, but hey, like I'm going to post my best pictures. I'm going to sell my supplements. And like, I actually don't have that much of a problem with that because it's like, look, like the guys like you and people like that calling stuff out is fine. I mean, it's good. It's more honest, but I like the whole, they say lying by omission. I think if you're like, it's understandable that as a business, you're going to post that just like, doctor, plastic surgeons, they're going to post their before and afters that are beneficial, right? Like where everybody had like the best results. That's just kind of how things are. But I think when it comes to like the ones who are just blatantly flat out lying, that to me is like, where did you get to that point where it's just like a just complete nonsense? And he's a pretty extreme level of that. Like even somebody like some of these Hollywood actors, they tend to just avoid the question of steroids and whatnot. Whereas, I saw Liver King on Logan Paul's. Yeah. I saw him on Logan Paul's podcast and he was like, if you don't think this is possible naturally, you're a subprimal, which I feel like it's his equivalent of like an incel or something like that, and he's just like, these subprimals, they don't believe. And he used like the classic bullshit steroid user argument of like, I've only put on 1 pound per year for the last 25 years since college, where I'd already been lifting for like 10 years. And it was just like, that classic argument. And it's interesting though, I guess it's like, okay, so, I mean, you're a role model for your kids. Are you telling your kids the truth, or are you just say, hey, like your kids are eventually going to hopefully have the intelligence to realize that you're just blatantly lying too. So your entire life is just built on like lying to people. It's weird. It's weird to imagine just like waking up every day and be like, I am just going to be a complete and utter fraud,
And it's like, it's going to catch up eventually, right? Like it's one of those things where you tell one lie and then you cover it up with another lie and you just cover it up and cover it up.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's built like just this pyramid, this palace of lies. And it's just so unnecessary as well. Like if he just said yes, it might hurt his business a little bit, but I don't think it would be like, oh, he can no longer survive. He's making millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like multi-millions of dollars through his supplements. Like, I think people would actually just appreciate the honesty. But he's too far beyond that, right? Because he lied and then he lied more and then he lied.
Yeah.
And so now he can't, right? He's just
well, he definitely can't now. But if I'm trying to be objective about it, I do think it would hurt his business a lot because we're imagining people like us. But the reality is like the biggest market is the general population. And the general population who sees him, they haven't worked out, they're 40 pounds overweight, and they think, wow, look, at this is the ticket. And if it's like, hey, this is the ticket because he's doing this primal lifestyle and all this stuff, if you if he says, hey, I'm also taking steroids, they're like, oh, that's why. So I actually do think it would harm his business a lot. And I understand financial motives. It's just interesting to choose that path of just, it'd almost be like being like a defense lawyer for rapists. It's like, can you wake up every day and do that? I mean, some people do it, it's hard to like to live that life.
I mean, yeah, he should be in the Olympics for the mental gymnastics competition if he feels like even remotely not shitty about himself.
Right.
Some people can do that. Like they can just, I'm helping people. Like I'm transforming their lives. Like I can tell this little lie and then, but it's for the greater good because no one thinks about themselves as the bad guy, right?
Sure.
They're all like, they justify it in some way. And so I'm sure he tells himself stories at night about how he's actually doing good things. But I don't think many people in the know would really agree with his assessment of the situation.
Yeah, there's a good book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. And the overall book is good, but it talks about how, we're very easily convinced of things, or, false memories it talks about as well, but how like a lot of justifications, right? And this is very common. You have doctors who maybe like they overcharge for a procedure, but they say, hey, this person's still benefiting. I mean, and the reality is we all make justifications in life, right? Like obviously we all try to justify the decisions we've made. So I'm not trying to say anybody here is perfect, but I think for somebody like that, for like Liver King, it probably is easy to say, well, by following this diet, a lot of people are going to improve their health, which could maybe be the case if you're losing weight. And, like if you're obese and you're eating the standard American diet and you go to a carnivore diet, you probably are going to see improved health markers in a lot of ways. You're going to be, probably significantly less obese. So it's probably a justification in that regard. And like you said, some like the tenants, hey, get outside more, this and that. Although he did have a bit on saying like he was really talking poorly on sunscreen. And I was like, man, I don't know if you really want to advocate people just being outside like all the time with no protection at all. But yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting to kind of observe it from the outside.
Yeah, no, it's pretty clear he doesn't. I would really have liked to sort of like, he must have a social media team. I'm pretty sure he does.
Mm-hmm.
And like, just, I would love to be a fly on the wall with those conversations about how they just, what is their game plan? How do they make decisions? Because it's not just him like, oh, let's chuck around some weights. I read an article about him, and yeah, he has a whole team, and they're all like, they set everything up, and everything is planned out in advance.
Yeah.
So I would really be curious as to what their decision-making process is. Because it seems like very quote unquote natural and instinctive and just sort of organic the way he puts it out there. It's not. Most of social media is not organic at all. It's just, especially with these bigger accounts, everything is planned out. And I think most people don't realize it's a team, right? Like if you DM someone with 1 million followers, you're probably not talking to them, right?
Yeah, sure.
Just, I saw Dorian Yates has like a coaching special on, oh, DM me the word champion or something, and get to work. Well, you're probably not talking to him. You're
Dorian Yates, yeah.
Yeah, so I think most people don't realize it's a business.
Sure.
It's a business. And usually the people who make it to the top are those who are business focused and know how to optimize their posts and everything to diddle that algorithm and get everything moving upwards in the right direction. And, it can be frustrating watching this happen when it often rewards people who probably shouldn't be rewarded. I know that sounds like, a little bit, mildly jealous or doesn't really seem, it's just being honest. Like a lot of the people who get big probably aren't the people who are doing the most good.
Well, I think that's an important point to remember, that it is a business, because there are arguments you could be made. Like he says, again, he talks about subprimals, because they'll say, oh, but like you're living in a mansion, you're doing this, you're doing that. And there's plenty of arguments that you could come up to. Like, for instance, he says, well, like, for instance, the diet itself is hard, he says. And it's like, yeah, but like, when have we ever gotten anything from stuff that was easy? Like the hard work is what makes it this and that and whatever. It's like, okay, well, why don't you apply that to your living situation? Why don't you live in a tent? Right. But like, the problem is you're trying to use logic for somebody who is not basing their arguments in logic. Right. And so at the end of the day, like, there's really not even a point in providing those arguments to him, because that's when he would just defer to like, oh, well, this is a subprimal argument or whatever. There's not going to be logic. It's just going to be justification.
Yeah, no, and he'll just avoid everything or duck and weave. And I'm actually kind of curious about what percentage of his followers are following him just like out of entertainment.
I think a lot.
How many actually believe this shit? Like how many have actually sipped the Kool-Aid? Because I actually kind of take the Greg Knuckles approach of just being entertained by this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right.
Greg has been in the industry for so long. He's just like, send me the dregs of the industry, just like the most absurd, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Calorie deniers and whatnot. I want to see it. I want to revel in it because I just find it to be super entertaining. And so I wonder how many of his followers take that mindset, that approach, and how many are like, oh yeah, I'm a primal, that kind of thing.
Right.
How does that actually break down?
I think probably at least half, honestly, are probably just like following along. It's just kind of interesting. You mentioned how it's almost seeming like people are getting away from call out culture a little bit, or we shouldn't be done as much, but you felt like there were arguments to be made for it, like just on the whole. So obviously we're using this as a specific example. But in general, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, you said something along the lines of like, it's almost looked down upon. But I was saying how, honestly, like I don't do like too many call out videos, but I do think that, well, one, probably my most popular video was a call out video, but two, I just think in general, it is important because at the end of the day, like if that isn't happening, if there's no, at least some discourse, then at some point, like it just like, rolls and rolls. And then eventually like everybody is convinced of something that shouldn't be happening. Right. Or just like poor influences.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where I do have a number of call out videos. I try to mix it with like informative content, because if you only do the call out stuff, then people only sub for that. And then when you have like a normal video, which I actually like making those actually informative training videos, people are like, what is this? Right? Like, if Filian made like 3 tips to improve your training or something, people will be like, what?
What is
this?
Yeah, exactly.
This is what I signed up for. That's not hate on Filian, by the way. That's not a call out in a call out reference. He just like, that's the style of content that he's chosen to make, which is fine. But I do think it is necessary, because otherwise people could just put out misinformation. And I mean, most people have no idea, right? Like if someone could say something and they have a great physique and they're very confident about it, maybe they drop a PubMed link or something, which doesn't actually support what they say, but like it's there and it's a paper and it's scientific. And they could just get away with that. And often there aren't as many call out channels as you think. Like there aren't that many that are big. And often I see people just post whatever and then they get away with it.
Right.
And I can't keep up because there's just so much.
Right.
And so, especially with the big stuff, like if someone says they gained 4 pounds of muscle from a supplement they're selling in a month, that kind of stuff.
Right.
I can't not post about that. And I think it is for the greater good. Some people are trying to paint it as like a bad thing or a negative thing. I think calling something bad out is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like how can that be a bad thing? I mean, how weak spine do you have to be to think that calling out bad things is a bad thing? So for me, I try not to get excessive with it, or like try to reach for something that isn't there.
Yeah.
But if it's serious and someone is like clearly malevolent, I think someone has to call that out. And I think it should be done.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that people are like, I've seen plenty of people say, oh, like just focus on yourself and just like focus on positivity. And it's like, yeah, but like, then that's not like, if somebody comes out with like, let's say Greg just said, talking about terkestrone, put on 4 pounds of lean body mass, whatever, in a month. And it's like, okay, so somebody says that. And then I put out a video. And again, this is coming from somebody who doesn't really do call out videos. I put out a video just saying like, a supplement review and like what's out there. And then I can just say like, these supplements are effective and these don't tend to be as effective, whatever. I mean, that is good, but it's also not going to help nearly as many people avoid the pitfall of, let's say, terkestrone. Where if I made a video saying like false claims of terkestrone and I say, hey, this is happening, there's no evidence at all to suggest that this would happen. There's almost no supplement ever that could do that. And it's actually on par with like a strong steroid if you're getting results like that. So how do you, do that? How do you put that claim out? And I think that, like you said, I think that is a good thing if you have somebody with like completely false claims. Now, obviously you could take that to the extreme and you could say like, like let's say there was like an Eric Helms, Mike Isertel debate. And if you were to just like totally just lambast Mike Isertel and say, this is BS, there's no evidence for this. Like, I think it's like, okay, you have to look at the person's intentions. Like, I think Mike Isertel is trying to put out good content. And you can say, I disagree with this personally. But then when you have somebody, again, it's like, I think if they're selling, like, let's say that supplement or just really false claims, you got like, who's the guy, V-Shred and all that stuff, then I think it makes sense to call it out, especially because so much of the general population, again, as we discussed earlier, are coming across this stuff with no background. right? And I think that's important. Like my video on like John's equation is like BS X3 bands and whatever. Like that is one of my most popular videos. And it's like, yeah, because people are probably, maybe they're searching X3 bands results. And it's good that they come across it and they could say, oh, okay, maybe there actually is no evidence. Whereas if they just came across this stuff, it's like, you just start to get in your head about it and you see more positive results, quote unquote, and you go from there.
Yeah, no, one of my most popular videos is on V-Shred's ARM program. And I still get emails to this day for people who are like, wow, I Googled this and like I came across this video. Thank you for saving me from this horrible program.
Yeah.
It's not any sense. And yeah, stuff like that, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. The trouble is, yeah, when people start to reach, right? Like their call out channels and they start to reach for stuff that maybe isn't there.
Right.
Like Greg Doucette made a video the other day and the title was like, oh, Ronnie didn't do steroids. Like he said he didn't take steroids on Jay Leno. But if you look at the comments that Ronnie actually said, he said, oh, a bodybuilding show. I don't want to do no steroids and I like hamburgers. Therefore, I can't do a bodybuilding show. So it's obvious in that context that he was saying to someone else, oh, I don't want to do a bodybuilding show because I would have to do steroids and I wouldn't be able to eat hamburgers. So if you just look at the sentence, it's obvious that he wasn't denying that he used steroids. It was just twisted, right? And some channels would just do this to try to find a title. And Greg's not the only one, but he's done it a bunch of times where it's just taken out of context and it's just there for the title to get people to click. And he'll be outraged, of course, that how could this person say something when they weren't actually, that's not what they meant, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is like willful ignorance or not being able to interpret what someone actually said, but to me it was very obvious that it was a pretty innocent statement and not denying that he had used steroids at all.
There's another funny one with Ronnie somewhere. I don't know which show it was. Maybe it was the same thing, but somebody said something about, there was like a Q&A with him and the person just nonchalantly, like as if it was obviously accepted that steroids were part of it. And he said something about steroids and Ronnie's like, I ain't never used no steroids. And it was just like, everybody's like cracking up. But I think at that level, it's like, come on, man. Like, do you really have to even say
he's
it?
Like, Ronnie's a charismatic guy. And so he's saying something that like pretty much everyone knows.
Right.
Oh, I would never do that. Right. Like, look at me. Right. Like it's obvious. And he's just sort of like playing around. But then like you take that statement, you're like, how dare he say this? And it's just taking everything out of context. And, sarcasm is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And it's pretty obvious when someone is behaving in that manner or when they're actually being malicious or lying. And so, yeah, it can be tricky because, but am I going to make a video calling out Greg on this one situation? No, it's just like, I go to the video, I watch it and I'm like, yeah, that's bullshit. That's not what he meant. And then I just move on with my day, right? It's like, it's only the really bad stuff that I think should be called out.
Sure. So you mentioned V-Shred's ARM program, and that was one of the things we talked about is like specific arm training. So you got some meaty, juicy arms, Geoff. So so give us your 3 top tips for big arms. No, but is there anything that you do that you think is different than the same tried and true principles? Or do you think it's just, hey, this is just a pretty good body part of mine and my insertions are pretty good? Or is it something specific?
So I guess a few things. I did change up my training split to where I have like a dedicated arm bro day where it's like shoulders, a little bit of arms, maybe like rotator cuff stuff. So my whole training split, just for context, is legs day 1, and then day 2 is chest and back mostly. So pushes, a little bit of pressing sometimes, and then rows and pulls. Okay. And then the day 3 is like basically just arms and shoulders, like isolation for shoulders. Okay. And then repeat. Occasionally I'll take a day off if like it just shows up. And so I do think that helps. You can sprinkle in the arm work throughout whatever split you have, but I found that just having that single day to focus on arms has helped, because they have grown the most, I would say, proportionally over the past couple of years. As for like genetics, it's sort of hard to say because, if you look at me when I started lifting, I wouldn't say that I had like standout arms, like they were naturally big. I mean, they're probably 12 inches or something, maybe 11 inches or like I was skinny, I was 150 or so pounds, which isn't rail thin,
right.
but I was starting pretty lean. I was, I gained pretty quickly from there. So maybe it's genetics. Like it's hard to tell. Like insertions do matter. And I do have a pretty full arm. But I think a lot of that is training as well. I do a lot of like overhead work where it's beyond failure. And I haven't seen many people do it the same way that I do it, where it's like pretty aggressive. It's not like slow and controlled, because I did that for many years. Like mind muscle connection, very slow, very controlled, feeling the weight, feeling the muscle, the contraction, the squeeze, the stretch. The trouble is it just limits the amount of weight you can use pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
Especially because I was doing like pretty high reps as well. And so I was using on overhead extensions and push downs like 20 kilos, 45 pounds or so. And now I'm using like 3 times that. So I have to stack dumbbells on the cable thing. And so that has helped a lot, where I haven't been doing like metabolic type of stuff or like mind muscle connection. It's basically just been straight sets and a lot of straight sets and heavier. So more like 8 to 10 rep stuff.
Yeah.
Even like 6 to 8 rep. And I did have a phase where I did even lower. I was doing like triples and sets of 4 and 5 and stuff, maxing out on incline dumbbell curls, stuff like that. Which in hindsight is probably not productive. I would say keep it at 5 and up reps. But you do see a lot of people, they stick to only like 10 to 15 for arms. And then it's only slow and controlled. And so the amount of weight is just not particularly high. And so with the cheat, so if it's a push down, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of lats involved. I'm using momentum, but I'm still controlling the eccentric. I'm still starting the movement with the triceps. I'm still finishing with the triceps. It's just like 50% more weight than I could with a super strict form.
Yeah.
Or maybe even more. It might even be like 60. I mean, I've gone up to like 80 kilos for push downs, which is like what, 176 pounds. So, I want to see if I can push down my body weight. That would be interesting. I don't know if that would actually have to like get someone to hold on to my feet
or something. Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting because that's a split that I used in high school actually. And it was basically, but it was rotating on a 5-day schedule. So it was actually by Tom Venuto. He was one of like my early influences, I guess. But yeah, so it was leg day, which was like a super, super brutal leg day, chest, back, and then shoulders and arms. And you'd kind of rotate on like every 5 days. I mean, I gained a ton, but I was also, just starting. So obviously it's hard to say. But you have people like John Meadows used to talk about a specifically arm devoted day. A lot of people have mentioned that they feel like that's really beneficial. Some theorize, which I don't really buy into, that like by having both parts of the muscle so pumped, there's like more of a stretch. I think it's probably more just like you're totally fresh for both, So I actually, so I have 2 upper days per week, and one of them I actually start with biceps and triceps, and the other one, which is pretty unusual, but it's the one I do at home. So I actually want my back and chest to be a little bit like weaker because it just makes it easier to, at home. And then my like heavy day on the weekend, I go to the gym, and that's like I start with, like all like the traditional, chest and back movements, and then I go down to like biceps, triceps. But it's interesting because you've got guys like you who, it's pretty rare actually that guys go from the slower controlled mind muscle connection to the heavier weight, just kind of like, rough form. Because typically it's like the standard, like the standard timeline is like you get into lifting, you got all this ego into it. Yeah, you're doing partials, you're doing all this craziness. And then after 10 years, you're like, wow, that was so dumb. I didn't need all that weight. Right. Yeah. I'm in pain. So now I can get the same stimulus with half the weight, and that's what you see a lot of guys, right? So to see you kind of go the opposite and still feel like you got better results by going back to that is interesting.
Yeah, because I was copying IFBB pros that I saw who probably were going in that direction because they're getting very, very strong. They're on anabolics. Maybe the pump is a bigger determinant of what an effective workout might be for them. Maybe there's some fascial stretching. Maybe the pump is just going to correlate with the anabolics that are coursing through their veins. But I found that not focusing on the pump, because that's what I was doing before, like lots of drop sets to where I was like probably finishing up with not much more than the bar on curls, sometimes less than the bar. I would finish with like dumbbells because the bar was too heavy because I was so fatigued from the quadruple drop set and stuff like that. I haven't done that kind of stuff in years, and I don't miss it. I don't think it'll ever make a return. The only thing that might change me back to more of that style of training would be if I got injured, right? Like if I had an elbow issue or shoulder or something or wrist where I could not train this way, yeah, maybe I might experiment with like blood flow restriction or like just to limit the weight that I was using. But I've found that as long as I'm reasonable with the progressive overload and I'm controlling the eccentric and I'm warming up super, super well, and I'm listening to my body, I haven't found that there's any injury issues training in this style. You could make the argument that it's riskier or the stimulus to fatigue ratio is worse, but I'm still doing pretty high volumes. And therefore, the argument is like, oh, it's higher stimulus, but it's also way higher fatigue. Therefore, you'd be better off doing this more controlled style to get a little bit less stimulus, but a lot less fatigue. Therefore, you could do more sets. And so overall, the stimulus to fatigue ratio would be better. But I'm already doing a shitload of sets. So that means I would have to be doing like 40 fucking sets for arms, like 40 for triceps, 40 for biceps or something. I'm a little busy for that kind of stuff. Like I like training, but I'd rather get after it with fewer sets, have them be theoretically higher stimulus, also higher fatigue. Because if I can recover and progress, it's a sign that fatigue is not really the issue. Plus, it might actually be better stimulus to fatigue ratio. Right? The stimulus might be so much higher that there's no amount of sets of this controlled pump style of training that could actually get the same results. Right? Like if you go from squatting and then you hurt your back, and then you go to leg extensions only, how many sets of leg extensions do you need to keep progressing when you used to be able to do like squats and hack squats and all these great movements? Right. It might be infinite leg extensions. Like there might not be enough leg extension volume in the world that you could use to still progress. Like it might just be some exercises are simply inferior. Just point blank. Like there's no amount of volume you can do. And that's actually, I would say that's what I found, because that controlled style, it plateaued me at like 15 inches. And now I'm like 17 and a half towards 18. And so, the numbers, they don't really lie. And so when I get people commenting saying like, oh, you shouldn't do cheat reps, you should do a drop set instead, because that gets you the same results. Yeah. It doesn't though, right? Like, and usually it's like beginners who just heard something online and they were just regurgitating it. But I found that this has been a lot more productive, time efficient, and more enjoyable actually overall too. Yeah. Just for people listening, and maybe you disagree, I highly doubt that one style versus the other would be a difference of 2.5 inches. Like assuming that you still lifted the same amount of time, assuming you still bulked and cut, like I don't think it would make that much of a difference. Because everything has grown, right? I assume over this time period. Like I don't know how much you weighed when you said you had 15-inch arms. How much did you weigh at the time? I want to say 83 kilos, 82. So like 180 maybe. Okay. And how much do you weigh now with 17 and a half? 210. Okay, right. So, obviously, I think just the gaining of weight is a huge factor up there. Like if I'd kept up with that style of training this entire time, I think I would have still grown, but certainly not as much. And I would say it's really hard to say what proportion is what, right? Like,
Yeah.
Is it the training? Is it the diet? Like, it's a combination. Is it the bulk,
Sure.
right? But to me, it's quite clearly superior. It's just like how much superior, and then, who is it superior for? And so if someone wants to train in a certain way, I'm never like, oh no, that's dumb. Like, you gotta do it this way. No, like, you gotta go by your own experiences. And so, I track everything to the point where I usually have a pretty good idea about what is causing what.
Mm-hmm.
Never 100%, and you never know for sure, like, the proportions. But for me, I'm quite confident in saying that it's a night and day difference, at least for me.
Yeah. Well, and again, the whole like individual variation there, right? Because I've just seen too many anecdotes for both methods to ever say that one is so clearly superior, right? Like Jay and Ronnie was classic, like duo, right? Going into the early like 2000s and whatnot. And Jay, don't get me wrong, people make this dichotomy too much, and they'll say, oh, Ronnie trained super heavy and hard and Jay used lightweights. It's like, no, Jay was incredibly strong, but he did not train like Ronnie to that same extent. And they were both, just absolute houses. So obviously genetics and everything factor in, but even like for you, like you could say the opposite would be like a Steve Hall, where he is all about like, stimulus to fatigue ratio, and a lot of his training is far from failure and very controlled. And he has also made fantastic progress, in that same time period. So I do think it's very likely that there is individual variation. But I think it's hard to say like one method in general is clearly superior on the whole.
Actually, I've taken actually some stuff from, his idea on like form resets. And there's a bunch of exercises. I actually have a video plan. I mean, I've reset my form one way or another on literally every exercise I've ever done at some point. Whether it's an RDL where I had to take it out of the spinal erectors because it's just like looking really not the way it's supposed to, or they're getting like quads out of the bottom position. It's not really like a hamstring stretch anymore. Because you can almost, for most movements, you can throw weight on the bar, but you're not doing it in the same way for bodybuilding, right? Like you're losing a lot of the effect by going up in weight. Some, not always, but sometimes you can sort of, I don't want to say cheat, because my form reset for arms was cheating,
right?
Right. It was not being so robotic. So I don't even consider it to be cheating. It's like me and my arm training is in an open relationship. So it's not cheating, I got that from a commenter. That wasn't mine, but I told him I would steal it if I stole it.
That's fine.
But then a lot of other stuff like squats, I've changed a lot. RDLs a lot. Bench press, I used to just springboard the shit out of it. I mean, it would go like halfway into my body, just like dive bomb it, and then like launch it up like that.
Well, that brings up, because I didn't even realize actually as we're talking about it, but you are kind of known for, okay, he's not super strong relative to his size, but that's because you have this strict form, you have full range of motion, etc. So is it specifically arms that you're doing some of this stuff?
Arms and rows and some laterals, but not to the extent that I used to. Like I used to do lateral raises with like 55, 65 pounds per hand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was ugly. My PR is like 25 kilos, 55 pounds for 50 reps.
Jeez, okay.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I think actually I attribute a lot of my trap gains to just like flailing lateral raises. Because it was like bent arms, it was a lot of hips.
Yeah.
It was a lot of like, ducking under the weight.
Sure.
To try to like pretend like you're getting full range of motion, but then not even getting full range of motion. And then by the last 10 reps, you're just like, not barely moving the weight. But, I actually did notice trap growth from that. The trouble is, it was shit for side delts.
Right. Yeah. Meadows, though, had a lot of stuff out on, what did he call them? I don't remember what he called them, but these partials, he had it for rear delts and he had it for laterals. Yeah, these kind of like swings.
Slingers or something, yeah.
Yeah, which I personally wasn't a huge fan of them. I definitely felt them. it made tracking, like I'm very big on like being able to track consistent progression. And it's like, okay, so I do a full rep, I can very easily measure that. But when you're just kind of swinging, it's like, am I swinging this one up 12 inches and 11 inches? It's very hard. I could see it being used as like a finisher, quote unquote, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's what I get that question a lot, especially on rows. Like I do, 4 sets of 15 on chest supported rows or something. The first set is roughly to failure. The second set is with failure and then a few partials and just going until I get to 15, right? So I might hit failure in full range of motion at 12 reps. I do 3 partials. Then the next set, I hit failure at 9 reps and I get 6 partials. And then the last set, I'm super fatigued. I might hit failure on full range of motion at like 6 reps in, and then I just keep powering away until I get 9 extra pathetic baby reps. By the end, it's just like like a kind of like a shrug or something.
Right.
And so people might say, hey, how do you track that? And I just say, I write it down as 4 sets of 15 with the understanding that the first set was roughly to failure. And then you can use that first set to gauge progress. Right. Because the other sets, you just understand, hey, like they're going to be to failure. How far beyond failure? I don't even track it. I don't even. And you have to have some other way to track progress, I think, especially when you're more advanced and it just becomes slower anyway. But for like lateral raises, I have lots of places in my training log where it's just like 6 sets of 15 or 5 sets of 20 or something. And I look at that and I just know it was some amount of failure per set.
That's interesting.
I don't know like how much it was because I don't bother tracking that. But like, okay, maybe I'll add a little bit of weight at some point, and then it'll jump up like from 10 kilos per hand to 12 kilos per hand. But it'll be the same sets and the same reps. I just know it'll look a little sloppier.
Yeah.
And then I'll clean it up and clean it up and clean it up, which might take months. And this is actually where it got to be out of hand because I was progressing too quickly and my form just went to shit and just, went. I was too aggressive with it, basically.
Yeah.
But now I am more patient. And so I still feel like I get a lot out of that process. I just have to hold myself back from using weights that are way in excess of what are going to be useful. And so the form reset wasn't completely strict reps all the time, but it was like strict enough, basically, compared to what it was before.
So almost all of your sets then are to failure, pretty much.
It depends. I would say pretty much all are within a couple reps. But it depends on the movement pattern. So rows, if it's like a chest supported row or a Helms row or something where it's like there's no postural support, like failure is kind of my default. And then I'll just go beyond that as the sets progress. And a lot of people ask me like, oh, reps in reserve. On rows, I mean, it's just a different. I mean, if I kept 3 reps in reserve on a row, I would finish the set and just be like, I just look at the weight and be like, well, I could do 18 more of that in the workout. And just like, I just get bored, right? It's not even, it might even be worse stimulus to fatigue because it's no stimulus compared to what I've been doing. And it's like the fatigue of just being fed up with such a miserable effort. And then stuff like pulls, vertical pulls, so pull downs, pull ups. I don't go beyond failure as much because usually sometimes it's that last little part of the range of motion, which is challenging, but it's a little bit more even than rows. Rows seem to be like, you just hit that sticking point at the end, but it's fairly smooth. Whereas often pulls will have like a sticking point at the very start and then also at the very end. This is why often you see people do like mid-range partials and pull-ups. Yeah. And you can like double your reps basically.
Yep.
That's one thing I had to reset as well because I was doing like, I think I did 40 kilos, 2 plates for 8 reps in the pull-up. But it was like, is like a little bit of this kind of action. Yeah. I just saw the other day, I just deleted that whole column from my chart. I was like, I'm never going to do this again. So it's like,
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Forget about this, because you start just comparing yourself to that, and then it's just not useful.
Right.
And so vertical pulls, I will tend to not go beyond failure as much, but I'll still typically go to failure, or maybe 0 reps in reserve.
Okay.
Because there's a little bit of a difference there. Pushes, I'm a little bit more conservative, especially if it's a bench press where I don't have a spotter, I don't have supports, but I'll still typically go 0 to 1 reps in reserve. And that's like a true 0 to 1 reps in reserve. For a lot of people, they say 0 to 1 and you're just like, I don't know, man, it didn't slow at all. And like,
so that whole thing where you'd say if you had like 5 sets, you just know that the latter sets are less, like the form is not as good, or, that's really applying to maybe like arms, laterals, some rows, but not.
Yeah. Yeah. Rows, laterals, a little bit of arms. Not typically biceps, more like push downs where you can like cheat a little bit, because you can cheat on curls, and I will a little bit. But I found that I'm a little bit more sensitive to biceps volume anyway, in terms of just like injury. Like I can do shitloads of extensions beyond failure, and I don't have any issues with that. But if I do like a whole bunch of sets of cheat curls, I feel like maybe that's not as not as smart, just for me. And then pushes and presses, it's hard to go beyond failure, really, because the sticking point is in the middle,
right?
Usually. So it's like, unless you have a spotter, and it's like it's a whole big thing. I have been using the Smith machine and for reverse grip bench. So if you fail, it's just like it's in the Smith machine. It's in the supports.
Yeah.
Or you can like.
So you're doing reverse grip Smith bench?
Yeah, actually, it's
Where'd you get that from?
I've used reverse grip before. It might have been bodybuilding.com, except I think they used a decline. And I remember looking at it like 4 years ago and just being like, Smith machine, he's an idiot. Bodybuilding. But yeah, it's actually pretty good. Some of those things
that was like a staple of mine for a while. I got it from like DC trainees, actually.
Okay. Yeah, they have lots of really good movements. They don't typically use flat barbell bench press. I think that's like the one they avoid.
Yeah, pretty much. It's very hard to do rest pause with that. I've tried it. It sucks. It's like, it's just not a good movement for it. Even like dumbbells in general are hard, because like you only rest about, they say 15 breaths, which becomes about 40 seconds in my experience. Like, cause they're taking like, full breaths, but to like kick those up every time, it's such a pain in the ass. And to like unrack a bar, it's just one of those things. Like, find a machine, like Smith machine's great. The hammer strength machines are great. Hammer strength is very big with DC trainees.
Yeah, no, it's some movements I've gotten sloppier and more cheating and like heavier and partials and stuff. And then other movements I've just done more sets and just focused on like straight sets, progressive overload, training close to failure, that kind of thing. And I do think the strength curve is important there. And some movements I don't even think, some movements I do keep reps in reserve, right? Like right now on squats and deadlifts, I'm a lot more respectful of those movements compared to before the QL issue. And just like looking around, there's a lot of people who used to deadlift and then they're just like, keep that shit away from me. Like I've seen a number of people. It's super common. And so, with an RDL, it's heavy, it's spinal loading, it's end range, stretching, muscle lengthening. And so like, you could keep 5 reps in reserve. And especially if you're focused on really sitting back and lengthening the hamstrings and controlling the eccentric, it honestly almost doesn't matter about reps in reserve. As long as it's pretty heavy and somewhat challenging. This is one situation where I don't necessarily push as close to failure, just because, being realistic and, not fear mongering, it is riskier. And like, if you really want to push to failure, there are other movements that you can add on later if you really want to do that. Like, go for the hamstring curl, that's going to be totally safe. And who gets snapped up on a hamstring curl, right? Like
Right.
that would be impressive if someone managed to do that. But there are movements that are just inherently, like, who gets hurt on a hip thrust, right? Like, is that, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I guess it's possible, right? Maybe you could hyperextend or something, but it's just, some movements, they do seem to inherently have a higher risk of injury. And for some people, when you say that, they're like, oh, provide a study, or, you're fear mongering. But just like observationally and talking to a lot of people, if someone hurts their knee, like, was it squats, or like, oh, was it this? If someone hurts their back, like deadlifting. If someone hurts their shoulder, like, often it's the bench press.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for these movements, it's just better to be a little bit more respectful of them, I guess. And
Yeah.
you can also, like, you're getting a lot out of them anyway, even without a super close proximity to failure.
So you say you do pretty high volume. How many days per week are you lifting, and about how many sets per muscle group?
6 or 7 days a week.
Wow.
I'll just take a day off. Yeah, so I'll just take a day off when it shows up, right? Like, not even if I'm tired, really, just like if there's something going on, that day. But yeah, typically 7 days a week. I would say it's more often 7 days a week compared to 6.
Wow.
And that's not, I don't know, it's just like part of my routine, and it's what gets me out of the house, right? Like, if I was working at an office or something, I would probably do like 4 days a week or something, or 5 days. But like, it's what gets me out of the house, and it's sort of what my day is formed around, etc. And so,
do you think that's more effective than like 4 or 5 days per week, or you just have split it up because you like to be out of the house that much?
I wouldn't say it's more effective. And I put a lot of people on 4 or 5 days a week plans.
Yeah.
And so, if anyone is listening to this and like, oh, I can't work out 7 days a week, I'm never gonna. No, a lot of people make progress on 3 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
You could even maybe go for 2 days a week. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say like any of my gains are from doing a certain number of days per week. And there are certainly, I could structure it for 4 days a week and get like pretty similar results, I would say.
Yeah. And did you already say how many? Oh yeah, sets.
Yeah, in terms of sets, it's auto-regulated, so it's not like a fixed number of sets. This is one issue where I used to track volume pretty heavily. Like, it used to be something that was measured and managed, but the trouble was, if you manage something too much, it becomes the goal. And sometimes just having more volume is not always a good thing. And so I was just doing too much volume. And if you think about it, the way to do more volume is to do easier exercises, to train further away from failure, just to be in the gym for longer, etc.
Yeah.
And so because I was just chasing the sets, the volume, because, I'd read the Schoenfeld study and 45 sets per week and all that stuff, I was like, I gotta do more sets. And almost like subconsciously, when you're doing more volume, your effort per set goes down.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, I don't track my volume week to week. I'll track it occasionally, like I'll add it up over the previous month, like, what was my number of sets, this month. And it looks like last month was, this is April. Let's see, 51 sets for hinges, 84 for squats, 50 for rows, 92 for pull, 91 push, 17 press, 6 for power, which is like, hang high
This
pulls
is per month.
Yeah, per month. So divided by 4.3 ish to get week. 100 for biceps. Damn, dude. 52
25
for
sets of biceps per week.
100
So
per month.
Right. So like 22, then 20, whatever it would be.
Yeah. 23, which is, it's a good amount.
Is that, so that's direct sets of biceps? Holy crap, dude.
Yeah. And then 68 for shoulders. Although it's worth noting that that 100 is a bit of an outlier. My average is 60. I'll just tell you the average for the past year. I think that's probably better than because it is varying because I'm auto regulating. So for hinges over the past year or so, 37. So around less than 10 sets per week for hinges. And that used to be way more. That used to be over double that.
Wow.
So that actually dropped down quite a bit. Let's see, 72 for squat. So, 16 or so per week. And then 63 for rows per month. 78 for pulls. So like 18 or so sets.
So you're doing over 30 sets for back per week. And then on top of that, you're doing an extra like 15 plus sets for biceps.
Yeah.
Wow. That is very high volume, dude.
Yeah. And they're all quality sets as well.
Right. Exactly. These are not like 4 RIR sets.
Yeah. This is where you have that volume to effort per set continuum, right? Where higher volumes has to be less effort per set. That's what we're told, right?
Yeah.
And then, lower volumes, you can do more effort per set. Kind of just did both. And then you get the question of like, oh, well, how do you recover? Well, I warm up really well. I'm getting probably 9 hours of sleep per night.
And steroids.
And tren.
Liver.
And actually, I think part of it is that I'm not that strong. Because I've actually thought about it. And often enhanced lifters, they have lower volume. Because they're so strong that the limiting factor is their connective tissue. Mm-hmm. So I've seen this several times where beginner, low volume, because you're so sensitive to it and you just don't need very much anyway. And your work capacity might not be that high. And then intermediate has the highest volume. And then when you're advanced, it might even dip, especially if you're advanced and you're moving just like ridiculous amounts of weight.
Yeah.
And so I would actually say I train more like an intermediate in a lot of ways, which seems a little bit paradoxical, but that's the only reason like I can come up with, because if I was like as strong as would be expected, with 3-plate bench, 4-plate squat, 5-plate deadlift or more, and I was doing those big movements, I wouldn't be able to do anywhere near.
But I think your strength, at this point, like what's your working weight for bench?
Last session was 95 kilos, close grip Larson press for 644.
Okay. So I don't know what that would be. 95 kilos is 210. 250. So let's say it's like 210, and you said what? 4x6 or something? Or you said 644? 644. Yeah. That's a close grip bench. That's not weak, dude. Again, and close grip, like my close grip is almost as strong as I don't really do wide grip ever. So, now again, I'm obviously smaller than you, but for 644, I might do, I don't know, like 230. No, not 250. No, definitely not 250.
Okay, so we're not that far off. What's your wingspan?
My what?
What's your wingspan?
6'4".
Okay.
Yeah, pretty long arms. What's yours?
Yeah. Might be 6'4", maybe 6'2".
Oh, really? Relative to your height.
I think it's slightly more than my height. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I definitely have very long arms, long legs. I think my legs are even longer. Like people consist, like whenever I like post like a video on my story or something, like there was one of me doing like split squats, and I had like so many people DM me like, your legs are so long. They are annoyingly long. So, but I'm just saying like and now again, I'm 195, you're 210, but I'm just like, it's not like you're weak. You know what I mean? You're not as strong as you look, but you're not weak. So that I'm just saying relative to that argument of like, well, it's because I'm so weak. Like, would the recovery be that much different if you had another 20 to 30 pounds on these lifts? It would be a little different, but I don't think it's like the reason. I don't think if you have this info out there already, then ignore this. But I think an interesting Instagram post for you would just be to like put it, because most people don't know or want to do the math for this monthly divided by 4.3. But I think what you just said, you should just take that and make an Instagram post and say like average weekly volume over the last 6 months. I think people would find that interesting because something I talked with Abel about is like, we kind of know generally from seeing your stuff what you do, but we don't really know what you do specifically. I mean, unless somebody's like really watching all of your stuff and pieces it together. So I think that'd be an interesting post of just like weekly volume, because I had no idea that you were doing like 35 sets a week of back. I mean, that's a ton.
Yeah, back especially because it was more of a focus this past year. I mean, everything was, but back especially lats. They were a big focus. But I get one of the reasons why I don't talk about it as much, because I think people would be tempted to fall into the same trap that I did, because those numbers are less than they were in 2019. In 2019, I was doing maybe 20% more volume. And a lot of that was on hinges. It was on squats.
Oh, the volume number is less, not your strength numbers.
Well, my strength is better now, but my volume was higher before.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. Yeah.
So it was considerably higher before. And that's because I was chasing volume. So my quality of the sets, in terms of like the execution, the intention, it just wasn't quite there. And then I was also like chasing numbers as well, but then also chasing volume, and it wasn't particularly well controlled. And so right now I don't have a number of sets that I want to have for a workout. I don't go into a workout thinking, I want to do this number of sets for this exercise. I usually give myself a range, 3 to 5 sets per exercise. Feeling good, I might do 6. But if I don't feel good, I might just do 2 sets, or maybe even just 1 set. Right? Like I've had times where, I wanted to do a side delt isolation, and I just did 1 set, and I was just like, I don't know. I just went home, right? Because like if I'm tired, I auto regulate a lot better than I used to. I used to like train myself into the ground, and then the next day would be like nothing. Then I train myself into the ground, and the next day would be a shitty workout. And so there's a lot less consistency. Whereas now, if I get the feeling like, why am I here? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I in the gym? I just leave. I'm just like, nope. Just like, nope. Because I know if I get the feeling and I train through it, it's like exponentially worse for recovery. And I'm not getting anything more out of it, especially as I'm already doing a pretty high level of volume anyway. So, for me right now, I'm fairly in tune with my body, with like what I need and how much I need, and what would be good for progression and what exercises I need. And like a lot of the stuff that I did in like 2018, 2019, it was dumb, but it also led me to finding what actually works for me.
What time do you work out typically?
2 p.m.
Okay, later. Yeah, because I like to go in the morning, because I don't know if I'm just like more tired than the average person or what, but for me, I have 1 workout per week that I go after work. And like when I was working with Steve, so it was like a high volume workout at home. So on top of it being high volume, it was a full upper rather than the other. Like we did upper, lower, and then we did push pull legs. So this was my upper workout, fairly high volume, all these adjustable dumbbells. So I'm taking weights off, put them on, taking them off, put them on. And it was like 5 p.m. after a work day. And I grew to just hate this workout. Like I really hated it. Versus like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I get up, I go to the gym, and I just feel so much better about it. 2 p.m., I guess, but like yours is a little different because you're not, again, like you mentioned, not in an office. So you're kind of just going about your day, doing your thing, and then you just go. So I could see that being optimal.
Yeah, I find that I haven't worked out in the morning in a really long time, but I don't feel as good. Like I need a little bit of time to get the blood caffeine levels a little bit elevated,
Yeah.
I just find like mid-afternoon is a good fit. I've gone in the evening, but I usually train. I don't eat before I train. So I don't eat in the morning. I don't have lunch. And then I go to the gym and I have.
But you consume calories, you're drinking. stuff, right?
I
Don't you
have
have
like
like milk and stuff?
I have a scoop of protein, yeah, and then I have a liter of milk as I train,
Okay.
which which is unusual, and it gets a lot of stares here because 90% of the
Yeah.
population is lactose intolerant.
Right. Yeah. Right. Um, yeah, man, I love cheese way too much to not like. I don't have any issues with it, but I was just visiting a friend, and he's like very lactose intolerant. And I was like, oh my god, dude, this sucks. Like every meal we ordered, I was like double my cheese because he just can't have any. So yeah, I know. I mean, I like that's like the days where I can just kind of like today, basically, it's 10 a.m. here, do this. Maybe I'll record a video, have a pre-workout shake, and then I'll go to the gym. I haven't had caffeine in years, and I very much miss it for sure.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I'm pretty sure I've had caffeine every day for like the past 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually more than norm, honestly. Like most people do at this point have
Yeah.
caffeine. So people have joked, like when I finished the whole Steve Hall coaching, it was like, oh, like, should I train with anybody next? And there's a lot of people, there's some of the suggestions I was pretty surprised about, but a lot of people were named, you were named. I was like, you would be, and we joked about that too, because you're very much, I don't want to say the opposite, but it's very different training.
Different, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. However, if you put me on 7 days a week and 35 sets for back, I'm going to tell you to screw off. So
No, like it wouldn't be. Yeah, that's why I don't talk about the volume that much, because I know there's going to be someone who sees that and then is like, oh, that's the key to everything, right?
mhm.
So I have most people on like evidence based, quote unquote, like moderate, typical 10 to 20 set or probably on the lower side most of the time
Mm.
sets, and then just because most people need to focus on the quality over the quantity anyway, right? Like getting the focus, the aggression, the intention, the execution, the technique, and getting the most out of every set before they add sets. So I have most people on like kind of modest volumes,
Mm.
and then like adding in if needed. So I don't know how much volume I would put you on, because Steve Hall is also fairly high volume. It sounds like you were doing a lot more than you had done before, right?
Well, that was what was interesting to me because I kind of expected it to be like much higher volume and a lot more like escalation throughout the weeks. But really, I don't know if you saw my whole video on it, but I posted like starting versus ending each week, and it was like things like biceps would only increase by like 1 or 2 sets throughout the entire mesocycle. Back and shoulders would increase maybe like 4 or 5 sets, but that was going from like 9 up to like 14, right? Or biceps and triceps might have been like 5 to 7. It wasn't actually as much as I was thinking he was going to put me on, which is interesting because it was 5 days a week versus 3. And I think leg training was definitely significantly more than what I was doing, because I kind of backed off there a little bit. And then I guess also some things that I just didn't do at all before. For instance, like I never had sets for rear delts specifically. I mean, obviously in my training I had, but for like a couple of years I hadn't. But in my past, for sure, I don't know. I never really seemed to notice much from it. So I might have been doing 6 sets there just for rear delts or some of these other things that like I wouldn't specifically go out of my way to train. So net volume throughout the week was high, but definitely not anything like what you're doing.
Yeah, and like again, this is just like auto regulated for me. So like every month is going to be a little bit different. And I do notice that I have less volume in a cut, but it's not intentional. It's just
You're
what
auto
happens.
regulating.
Yeah, exactly. Like it drops by like maybe 20 to 30%.
Hmm.
But it's not intentional. And then when I'm in a surplus, like I just feel like I have more energy and then recovery is better, et cetera. And so I just end up having more volume just sort of naturally.
Okay. Yeah. So I thought this was great because I don't think we've ever actually touched on your training specifically this much. Is there anything else that jumps out to you that, like, I don't know, any secrets of the Geoffrey Verity Schofield training? I think we covered it pretty well.
Um, definitely no secrets. It's just like a lot of auto regulation, a lot of finding the movements that work for me. And then this past 3 months has been a little bit different just because I've been working around injury. And so I haven't been able to squat or deadlift heavy at all, really. Um, like I've retweaked my QL like 6 or 7 times. Like I've tweaked it on leg press, I've tweaked it on unilateral leg press, I've tweaked it on back squats, I've tweaked it on sumo deadlift, I've tweaked it on deficit deadlift, I've tweaked it on pretty much everything. And so like the training has been different the past 3 months. I've managed to keep most of my leg size, I think. But yeah, I guess there's nothing really special to the system. And if anyone's listening to this, like you have to find your own system. It'll probably be lower volume. I could say that for most people watching this. But it might be different movements. It might be, a different training split. It might be different execution, right? Like, you mentioned Steve Hall. Like he's clearly getting, really good progression. And so, what he's doing is working for him. And I've actually incorporated a lot of the stuff that he's included with like the form resets. And, like he talked about resetting his form on RDLs. His form already looked fantastic.
Right.
Like really keeping it in the hamstrings. And he's like, yeah, I don't quite feel it as much. And I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, they look pretty much perfect to me.
Yeah.
And my Romanian deadlift is like knees drifting forward, erectors coming in. And so, I've actually learned a lot from his methods as well. So
yeah, and there's not as much of a dichotomy with Steve as people think. Like even before I like trained with him or watched some of his stuff, like you might think like, oh, it's, so far from failure and it's like pristine form and lightweight. And it's really not. Like Steve's a strong guy. Like, some of the compound movements he does, he's strong. And so the actual reality of what's happening, I think it's just because it's a talking point of like, oh, it's this method versus that method. But the actual training and the exercise selection, everything is really not that different.
Yeah, it's probably more similar. Like I saw him make a post about the benefits of cheating during rows.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was maybe a month or two ago.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, he's like, yeah, you can overload the eccentric and you can maybe move a little bit more weight to the top, that kind of thing. And I'm like, there's probably more similarities than differences, I would say. And, often like systems that seem totally different, like it's still working hard, it's still lifting weights, it's still like a lot of the same movements.
Yep.
It might just be like, I don't know, 20% difference or 30% at most. So I would say there's probably more similarities and more overlap than a lot of people think. Because often, people see just the differences, but there's definitely a lot of similarities too.
For sure. All right, man. Well, people want more of the GVS secret sauce. Where can they find your work?
YouTube would probably be the best place. It's just my name, also on Instagram, also my name. And yeah.
Awesome, man. Thanks, God.